So here's something interesting. I want to tell you a story. A story that's going to take us through government legislation, not so competent ministers, and also tell you how pay TV owner MultiChoice and a few other corporates played a role in delaying South Africa from turning off the terrestrial analog signal. I'm also going to explain to you why this is actually important and how it's holding you and me back as a South African. This is going to be a longer video than what I normally do on this channel. In fact, it's going to feel rather like somewhat of a documentary, but I want you to stay the course because I want you to understand this pretty complex, as they put it, but rather simple story. Even though we can't do anything about it, 80% of the whole thing is you knowing about it. It's 2006 and South Africa is buzzing with excitement about hosting the 2010 FIFA World Cup. The government has an ambitious plan. By the time that the world's eyes are on South Africa, 80% of the country will have access to crisp digital television signals, and thereafter analog TV would be history by November of 2011. Fast forward to today when I'm recording this, it's 2025 and we're still talking about that very same project. Welcome to one of the most spectacular technological failures in South African history. A project so mired and bungled up and badly managed that it's missed 20 years of deadlines set by them and not even us. And you guessed it, it's cost us billions of rands as the taxpayers. That's what we've had to deal with. This is the story of how South Africa turned a simple TV upgrade into a 2-decade nightmare that involves corporate capture, government incompetence, and a nation that's been left watching fuzzy analog signals while the rest of the world has moved on. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is digital TV migration and how does it actually matter to you? Think of it like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone. Analog TV signals are like those old flippy phones. They work, but they're incredibly inefficient. They hog precious radio frequency spectrums. Digital signals, on the other hand, are like smartphones. They can do so much more with less space. The same amount of spectrum that carried one fuzzy analog channel can now carry multiple high-definition digital channels. Plus, you can get better picture quality, clearer sound, and interactive features. But here's where it gets really interesting and also where the big money comes in. When you free up all that spectrum from analog broadcast, you create what's called a digital dividend. This is prime real estate in the airwaves that mobile operators desperately want for their 4G and 5G networks. More spectrum actually means better coverage and theoretically cheaper data prices for you, the consumer. I hope you're starting to see where we're going here. So the plan was rather simple. Give everyone a set-top box to decode digital signals, switch off the analog transmitters, and sell the freed up spectrum to mobile operators. It seems easy, right? Well, it wasn't so easy. Before we dive into what went wrong, you need to meet and understand the key players in this digital migration drama. First up, we've got the government. They were represented by a rotating cast of 12 different communications ministers over 2 decades. Each one of them inherited the mess that the last one left, and they made new promises. They also set new deadlines and then either got reshuffled or watched their deadlines go past without any consequence. Then you've got the SABC, South Africa's public broadcaster. For most of this period, they were caught between serving the public and staying financially afloat. They became an unwitting pawn in a much larger game, sometimes to their knowledge and sometimes without them actually being aware. Then you've got MultiChoice. This is the pay TV giant behind DStv. They had the most to lose if digital migration succeeded in the wrong way. And they fought hard to protect their turf. Then you've got ETV and eMedia, the commercial broadcaster that saw digital migration as their golden ticket to break into the pay TV market and tried to challenge MultiChoice's dominance. Then there's us, the people, the millions of South Africans who just wanted to watch TV without political drama. But we ended up as collateral in a larger corporate and political war. Now, as with all things that jam up progress, it's always something small with a big impact, and in this case, there's a seemingly boring technical feature called conditional access or encryption. Now, this is a feature that turned this whole entire digital migration debacle into the mother of all corporate battles. But here's why it mattered so much. You see, without encryption, set-top boxes are just basic converters that turn digital signals into pictures on your old TVs. But with encryption, those boxes become powerful tools that can control who watches what, and more importantly, who pays for what. You need to think of encryption like a bouncer at an exclusive club. Without it, everyone walks in for free. With it, you can charge cover fees, offer VIP sections, and control the entire experience. For ETV, encryption was their ticket to the big leagues. The government was planning to give away 5 million set-top boxes to low-income households. Now, if those boxes had encryption, ETV could suddenly offer pay TV services to 5 million homes without spending a cent on distribution. They would suddenly become a ready-made competitor to DStv, and they'd be subsidized by the taxpayers. Now, for MultiChoice, this was an existential threat. They'd spent decades and billions of rands building their subscriber base and distribution network. However, now the government wanted to hand their biggest competitor a ready-made audience of 5 million plus potential customers. As they always say, okay, what happened next was a masterclass, and honestly must be studied, in corporate lobbying that allegedly, I have to say this, crossed the line into what critics called a form of state capture. There's that term again. MultiChoice didn't just oppose encryption, they waged a sophisticated campaign to kill it altogether. And here's how they did it. Step one was the capture of the public broadcaster in 2013. MultiChoice signed a deal with the cash-strapped SABC that was brilliant in its simplicity. They'd pay the SABC millions to carry news, entertainment on DStv, as well as an entertainment channel called SABC Encore. Do some of you remember this channel? Now, to go even further, the deal also included access to SABC's archives. But buried in this contract was a Trojan horse. If the SABC ever broadcasted encrypted channels on digital TV, MultiChoice could cancel the deal. MultiChoice and the SABC signed this 5-year deal, and it was reportedly worth 553 million rand, $500 million. This was reported from various news sources. Suddenly, the public broadcaster, which should have been neutral in this entire thing, was financially incentivized to oppose encryption. Because imali iyangena, chief. But weirdly enough, it's coming from your competitor, so it's tricky. The SABC chairman even joked about wanting to marry MultiChoice. It wasn't really a joke, and nor was it funny. Step 2, astroturfing and fake grassroots support. It's also alleged that MultiChoice secretly helped write opinion pieces that appeared under the names of industry lobby groups. Internal emails around that time showed that MultiChoice executives literally drafting articles that were then published under other people's names. These were attacking government policy as well as the incumbent communications ministers. Yeah, it starts to get murky. Then there was political intelligence and access. Perhaps most disturbing were the signs that MultiChoice had inside knowledge of government decisions. Company executives were telling people that communications minister at the time, Minister Yunus Karim, would be fired months before it happened, and before Karim himself even knew about it. Let's go to step 4. This was more of the nuclear option. When all else failed, MultiChoice's parent company, Naspers, went nuclear. The chairman at the time wrote an internal memo calling Minister Karim temperamentally unsuited to high political office. And he claimed that he was in the power of ETV. While MultiChoice was playing political chess, the government wasn't doing much better at the time because they were busy playing a very terrible to watch game of musical chairs with the ministers as well as deadlines. The numbers around the comings and goings of the communications ministry are just staggering. 12 different communications ministers, over 20 missed digital migration deadlines, and a project that went from a 2011 target to still being incomplete in 2025. You know what, Aisha, Urhulumente, they're just not suited to be trusted on anything that has to do with the deadline. In fact, the result of all this tomfoolery is that each minister would inherit the mess carried over from the previous minister, then they would promise to fix it, and then progress wouldn't happen. Then they would set a new deadline, then we'd all watch that deadline come and go. But the real kicker here was the flip-flopping, in particular with regards to encryption. In December of 2013, Cabinet approved the migration, but encryption was included in the set-top boxes. It was a done deal, signed off at the highest level. Then, a few months after the 2014 elections, Jacob Zuma reshuffled his cabinet, bringing in Faith Mutambi as the new communications minister. In a move which shocked a lot of industry observers, Mutambi simply just reversed the cabinet decision. No consultation, no explanation, just a complete 180-degree turn which suddenly favored MultiChoice's position. This wasn't just bad governance. It was a fundamental breakdown of the constitutional order. Cabinet decisions aren't supposed to be overturned by individual ministers on a whim. At least that's what we all thought. But guess what? We all have little nyana skeletons in the closet. Now, while all of that was happening, the government set-top box distribution program was turning into its own disaster. The plan was to help 5 million indigent households, those earning less than 3,500 Rand per month. They would get free set-top boxes so that they wouldn't be left behind with this new digital migration. The government had spent over 10 billion Rand procuring these boxes. They ran a registration program from 2015 to 2021 with multiple extensions and massive public awareness campaigns. Actually, let me know if you knew about this campaign to register for these boxes. Let us know down below. Okay, so what was the result of all this? Only 1.7 million households bothered to register, and only 1.5 million actually qualified. That means that each successfully distributed set-top box cost the government 6,667 Rand, more than a month's salary for the people it was meant to help. I don't know if I'm seeing this the wrong way. Let me know down below. But it actually gets worse. Hundreds of thousands of people who did register are still waiting for their boxes. Addresses were incomplete, phone numbers had changed, and the installation process was plagued by allegations of corruption and incompetence. While the political battles raged on, something even more valuable was being held hostage: radio spectrum. Remember that digital dividend that we talked about? That spectrum is worth billions to mobile operators and could have transformed South Africa's digital economy. For decades, this precious resource sat unused while politicians and corporations fought over TV encryption. The mobile operators were clear. They needed this spectrum to improve network coverage and reduce data costs. For a country where data prices are a major barrier to digital inclusion, this was a disaster. Remember the data must fall stuff? Yeah. It wasn't until 2022 that government finally led a spectrum auction, raising 14.5 billion Rand. But even then, operators said that they couldn't pay for the digital dividend spectrum until broadcasters had actually vacated it. Think about the opportunity cost here. For 10 years, South Africa could have had better mobile coverage, cheaper data, and faster economic growth. Instead, we had political paralysis and corporate gamesmanship. As the political process failed, the courts became the last line of defense for the rule of law. ETV took multiple communications ministers to court, arguing that they were making irrational decisions without proper consultation. In a landmark 2022 ruling, the Constitutional Court agreed, finding that Minister Khumbudzo Chabeni had failed to consult with stakeholders and she had acted unlawfully. The court's language was rather scathing. It called the minister's approach lethargic and described the minister's decisions as rather irrational. It was a rare example of judicial oversight working as intended. But here's the crazy part. The current minister, Solly Malatsi, appears to be making exactly the same mistakes as his predecessors. ETV has taken him to court too, arguing that he is setting deadlines without proper consultation or planning. It's like watching the same movie over and over again with different actors playing the exact same characters, making the same mistakes. Now, behind all of the corporate battles and political games, there are real people who just want to watch television. When analog transmitters were switched off in 5 smaller provinces, the SABC immediately lost massive chunks of its audience. Now, for a public broadcaster already struggling financially, this was rather devastating. Community TV stations, which serve local audiences and often operate on shoestring budgets, they faced an even worse fate. They saw 40% of their viewerships almost dwindle overnight, which is a death sentence for stations that rely on advertising revenue. And what about the millions of households that could be cut off? The government's attitude seemed to be that this was an acceptable casualty of progress. But for the families who couldn't afford satellite TV or new digital TVs, losing access to television means losing access to things like news, education, and entertainment. Now, in a country like ours that has high unemployment and inequality, television isn't just entertainment. It's often a primary source of information, and it's a connection to the wider world. There's also another irony in all of this, right? While South Africa spent 2 decades fighting over digital terrestrial television, the world was moving on. It was moving on to streaming. Netflix, Showmax, and other streaming services, they've exploded in popularity right here in the country. Young South Africans are increasingly watching content on their phones and tablets rather than traditional television. The cord-cutting revolution that hit developed countries is now and has now reached South Africa. In other words, South Africa spent 20 years perfecting yesterday's technology. Well, kind of. It's like mastering the art of building better payphones just as everyone switched to smartphones. The digital dividend spectrum that was held hostage for so long, well, it's now being used for mobile networks that enable streaming services that are making traditional TVs even less relevant every year. The revolution wasn't televised, it was streamed. So where are we now? Well, as of 2025, South Africa still hasn't completed its digital migration. The last deadline was March 31st of 2025, but that's come and gone. The government has distributed some set-top boxes and switched off some analog transmitters, but the job remains unfinished. Millions of households are still at risk of being cut off, and the political will to complete this project seems to be evaporating. Minister Solly Malatsi, the latest in a long line of communications ministers, faces the same challenges as his predecessors: corporate pressure, technical complexity, and the accumulated mess of 2 decades of failure. I really don't kind of blame him that much for this thing. I mean, he's just gotten in. The question isn't really whether South Africa will eventually complete its digital migration. It probably will someday. The question is whether it will matter by the time that it's done. South Africa's digital TV migration disaster, it offers several important lessons for us. Corporate capture is real. MultiChoice's campaign to influence government policy shows just how powerful corporations can manipulate democratic processes. The revolving door between industry and government, the strategic use of lobbying, and the capture of supposedly neutral institutions like the SABC, all of these things contributed to policy paralysis. Look, institutions matter. When political processes fail, courts and civil society become very crucial. The Concord's intervention showed that judicial oversight can still function even when other institutions are compromised. While South Africa debated 20th century technology, the world was moving on to 21st century solutions. The lesson is that perfect can be the enemy of good. Sometimes it's better to implement an imperfect solution than to spend decades seeking perfection. This entire saga illustrates that there's a tension between public policy and private profit. When regulatory decisions can make or break billion-rand businesses, the temptation for businesses to influence those decisions becomes overwhelming. Then there's the leadership. The one period when real progress was made was under Minister Khumbudzo Chabeni, who had strong political backing and was willing to make the really tough decisions. It also shows that even complex technical projects, they can succeed if there's proper leadership or there's political will. Very ironic. The story of South Africa's digital migration isn't over yet, but it's already a cautionary tale of what happens when corporate interests, the government's incompetence, and political paralysis, all of these things, when they happened to be in one big boikikos. In the end, this isn't really a story about television technology. It's a story about power, influence, and the challenges of governing in a complex democracy like ours. And unfortunately, it's a story that's still being written. Thank you for watching this video up until this point. I hope it was as interesting for you to watch as it was for us to make for you. Check out one of these other videos and hopefully they'll be just as interesting as this one. Cheers.